Now the boy Samuel was serving the Lord under Eli. The Lord's word was rare at that time, and visions weren't widely known. One day, Eli, whose eyes had grown so weak he was unable to see, was lying down in his room. God's lamp hadn't gone out yet, and Samuel was lying down in the Lord's temple where God's chest was. The Lord called to Samuel. I'm here, he said. Samuel hurried to Eli and said, I'm here. You called me? I didn't call you, Eli replied. Go lie down. So he did. Again, the Lord called Samuel. So Samuel got up, went to Eli, and said, I'm here. You called me? I didn't call my son, Eli replied. Go and lie down. Now Samuel didn't yet know the Lord, and the Lord's word hadn't yet been revealed to him. A third time the Lord called Samuel. He got up, went to Eli, and said, I'm here. You called me. Then Eli realized that it was the Lord who was calling the boy. So Eli said to Samuel, go and lie down. If he calls you, say, speak, Lord. Your servant is listening. So Samuel went and lay down where he had been. I'd like for us to spend a few moments thinking about this idea of slowed to listen. Slow to listen. This passage of scripture is often titled within the scripture, within our Bibles that have designated titles to these segments in order to help us understand what's going on. They title it Samuel's Call, or the calling of Samuel. And the idea of calling uh, in this text is so explicit as literally over and over. God is calling Samuel's name, and Samuel responds simply by saying, I'm here. But there are many calling stories that we find in the Bible, and many times the person who is being called by God runs from that or argues or wrestles with God in that calling, doesn't recognize the calling as Samuel didn't at first, or recognizes it, but somehow believes that, oh, this there's something about this that I can't consent to, that I can't embrace at this time. And so many of the call stories that we find in scriptures, as well as if we share our own stories of God calling us into the work and ministry of the church and the mission of the church of Jesus Christ, that is not necessarily a simple, oh sure, I'll do that. Yes, like Isaiah's called to ministry, where his response is, send me. But if you read that story, it is so that vision that um, the prophet received was so um, startling and transforming and so incredible that it's almost how else it's almost no wonder how else could he have responded. Many of us hear the call differently. Some of us hear it whispered, some of us hear it in a shout, some of us hear it through a dream or an encounter with another person. And some of us think that calling is something that only happens to someone who's called to pastor or to become a missionary or to to be in a particular role of service in God's church. So maybe that's serving as a deacon or being called to minister through music or through dance or through the visual arts. Um, that it has to be some particular role that has already been called out and carved out in our understanding what it means to have a called position in God's church. And I think that all of those things that I just mentioned, I think are callings, but I also think that God also will also call us to respond in moments. Here we have the call of the prophet, and the call of the prophet is to speak on behalf of God, to the people of God in a given situation. And here we have Samuel, who the text even tells us didn't know God, did not recognize that call, thought it was Eli because he heard someone calling his name, and the only person around to do that was the person that he knew. And so he, despite the fact that he kept going and Eli kept saying, no, go back to bed, I'm not calling you, let's sleep. Probably a little annoyed himself because he was trying to get his rest in, and time after time. And he never says in that story, in the recount, um, I keep hearing this voice, because he already has in his mind there is only one possibility. It has to be Eli. And despite the fact that over and over Eli says, I didn't call you, Samuel goes to him when he hears the name Samuel. It has to be Eli. Who else could it be? And I think that in this moment, with I think what we're experiencing in some ways is a collective call to the people, the children of God. And I use that term to be so much more expansive than the church, to be so much more expansive than the Christian community or the faith community or religious communities. But I mean that to be those who are created by God as human beings, which is all human beings. I'm being as inclusive with that terminology as I can be, and I believe that we see, because it's crossing religious lines. It's crossing all sorts of boundaries of age, of race, of ethnicity, of nationality, of sex or gender, of of able or disabled, just all of those segments and categories that we put people in. This moment of unrest with the kingdom of this world is rising up, and it's rising up all around the world, and it's rising up all around the world in a solidarity that I think is unprecedented, and that's a word that is bantied about a lot, but I can't think of uh, the closest solidarity movement that I can think of was around the worldwide response to 9/11. And sometimes we forget that 9/11, the victims of that attack were international in reach. By hitting the World Trade Center towers, that's a world trade, right? That by its nature is international. By its very definition, involves people from all around the world, and so people all around the world were touched by that. But it was also this communal response to what was happening in America. We see that happening today, as what's being recognized is that there's a problem in America, and people around the world are standing in solidarity with that problem and wanting to address it. It's part of being a leader. And even though in many ways we over the last 3 years have begun to systematically abdicate our role as leaders in the world, um, intentionally, I think gratuitously and cruelly, withdrawing from the Paris Climate Agreement, closing our doors to refugees and migrants and asylum seekers and immigrants in general. Um, just to name a few things that have been done, have dispelled what an ugly truth about the American experience. And what we see over the last few weeks, as we have slowed down as a world community, and in many ways have been very focused and siloed in our attention on the coronavirus and the response around the world and the outbreaks around the world and in our communities, particularly those that have been um, very heavily impacted and hard hit. Um, we've also just slowed down so we can pay attention in a different way. And I think that there are a lot of people who, because of this moment, have not only seen what's going on in the world, but because there are so many things that we cannot do right now, that there's an energy and a space that's available to confront things that in other circumstances we would not even notice, that wouldn't even be reported or not be reported widely and certainly not consistently. And so we see people on all corners of the globe standing up against racism in America, but in other corners of the world as well. We know it exists. But particularly racialized violence, violence against Black people. And the truth is that all of our isms, all of our systemic um, ways of oppressing groups of people, all are rooted in this otherness, how we make someone else an other, and that is rooted ultimately in a certain level of self hate and self devaluing. Because if I truly love myself, then I am able to love my neighbor fully. I am able to see God in other people. I am able to see other people as divine and as value and having worth and mattering. And so, what does this have to do with Samuel? Well, it has to do with the fact that right now, I think that God is calling us communally to this work. And but in different ways. So we each have lanes and we each have roles, and each one is necessary and important. And so there's some who are called to go out in the streets and to have the signs and to march and to bring a visible demonstration of another way. Some are called to advocate with their representatives in whatever with a representative government, whether it's a council person or assembly person, but to call to get on the phone or to send an email or to sign petitions. Some are called in this moment in a particular way to educate themselves and to deconstruct the mythology that they have taught and believed their entire lives about racism and what race really is and what that means, what the definitions are, how it impacts, and what are the root causes, and that deep and hard work to uncover implicit bias, to unpack embedded theology, to deconstruct myths. That's a hard work. And a lot of people are reading books and watching movies and entering into conversations with people that they have not had before or that they have dismissed before, but are really engaging in doing that. And that's another role, another work. Some are called to enter into the systems, to run for office, to form organizations, to be leaders within the movement, um, outside the system. Some are called to go in the system and transform from within. Others may be called in this moment to open up your checkbook, your pocketbook, your bank account to bring forth resources. There's an expression that if and I know I don't write checks anymore, so I realize this analogy. But if I look at your bank statement, if I look at your statement of account, if I look at how your money is flowing, that tells me what you value. It tells me who you are. And so giving money, so when you have an abundance of resources, so there's a certain, we have to live, we have to survive. But if you have an abundance of what are you doing with your abundance? How are you using your abundance? Is it advancing God's kingdom, or is it doing something else? And that isn't to say that there aren't ways of caring for ourselves doesn't say that I'm not suggesting that we are all called to sort of a monastic life, a life of extreme self-sacrifice. But I think we are called to sacrifice. I think we are called to give up of the essence of ourselves, and whether that's our time, our talents, our treasure, or all of the above, in the pursuit of God. And sometimes that's through giving to your church, and sometimes that's giving to Black Lives Matter. Sometimes that's giving to the ACLU. Sometimes that's giving to the Southern Poverty Law Center. Sometimes that's giving to a political someone who's running for office who needs support because they aren't getting corporate support, or they aren't getting support from those who embrace the status quo. um, Sometimes that's a tax deduction. Sometimes it's not. Sometimes that is um, that's funding your food pantry, um, or that is sometimes that's making decisions to support um, Black-owned businesses, indigenous owned businesses, Latino or Latinx owned businesses, Asian American businesses, Pacific Islander businesses, can be patronizing um, um, businesses owned by disabled persons, could be hiring disabled persons, making accommodation for someone who has a disability but still has tremendous value and will bring a perspective that otherwise you would not have. Because some of us are called to work within the economic system in which we live, to make those type of decisions. Sometimes it means not shopping at um, some retail outlets that do not share your values. So there are lots of ways, but whatever it is, when you hear that voice that prods you, that's waking you up at night, where you hear it in your ear, and the person who's by you doesn't hear it. Part of what's in the story is that the voice of God is speaking, and Eli is in close proximity, but he doesn't hear it because God isn't speaking to Eli. God's already spoken to Eli in the past. God has already given Eli, because Eli is towards the end of his life. So Eli has already received and responded to the call of God and what God has asked Eli to do. And now Samuel is hearing God call Samuel's name. So what God calls us to do, God calls us to do by name. God, while there is a collective, I think, call in this time to work towards anti-racism, to be embraced and to become anti-racist, individually and collectively. God is calling us to do our part in that. And if we don't respond to our individual call in this moment or in any moment, then that doesn't get done. And the ripple effects of that, you don't know what the role is. So Samuel is called to this, but Samuel then will be the one who God will use to call and to speak to the kings of Israel, to speak truth to power, to move in miraculous and incredible ways through his ministry. But in this moment, he doesn't know that. All he knows is somebody's waking him up, waking him from his sleep, from his slumber, from his rest. And it doesn't mean that he never gets a chance to rest again. It doesn't mean that he doesn't get a chance to 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 um, to sleep. He does, because that's part of life too. But there are times in our lives where God says, you got to wake up because there's something going on that you need to be attentive to because I'm going to use you in this moment to respond to it. And sometimes the person who is there in proximity, they don't even know because there's Eli. And Eli is important in this story, not because God's calling him, but because he has had the experience of being called by God and has had and knows God for himself, that he can say to Eli, to Samuel, who does not have that frame of reference, I think I know what's going on here. I think I know what's happening, at least to a point. Go lay down. Don't go back to sleep, but go lay down and listen. There's wisdom in being told to listen, and there's wisdom in slowing down to listen. And I think in this moment, we have been slowed to listen. I believe in everything good or bad, we get there is a lesson to be learned in it. And I don't say that God sent this virus, but I do believe that we can find some blessing within. It's not a blessing, it's horrendous, it's horrible, it's absolutely devastating, and we need to take continue to take that seriously. People are still getting sick, people are still in the ICU, people are still on ventilators, people are still dying, and we need to take that seriously. We need to stop putting pressure on people to pretend that it doesn't exist and that it's still with us, and we don't have an end in sight. I believe there is an end, but it's not in sight. And so we've been slowed down. And some people chafe against that because it's uncomfortable. But part of it, I think, is getting us used to being uncomfortable in different ways, to living with uncertainty and saying, well, we've got to respond to what's ahead of us. We've got to respond to what is in front of us right now. And God's voice will come in unexpected ways and places and through unexpected origins. And we've been slowed down to listen. Samuel said, I'm here. Samuel said, speak, Lord, your servant is listening. That was the first step to fulfilling his call, was to truly hear what God had to say. And we would do well, I think, to slow down and to listen and not to be so um, eager to return to what used to be normal. Normal is a constantly evolving state of being. We have new normals all the time, just in the course of our lives. We move, we change jobs, we retire, we graduate from school, we get married, we have children, um, we lose people we love, we meet new friends, new people move in and out of our communities. What's normal? Normal is this elusive thing that we try to hold on to because we it gives us a measure of peace and control of a sense of peace, not real peace, an illusion almost of peace and of control. This idea of normalcy. Instead of seeking normal, let's seek God's vision for creation. I'm glad that Jesus didn't say, "Well, I'm not going to come down and embody God's love in the world because they've got a normal to hold on to. I'm glad that the abolitionists did not stop fighting against the horror of slavery because they said, oh, well, it's normal. I'm glad that in every moment in history, people have gotten up, risen up, and have pursued better. Forget normal. Let's go for better. We do that by understanding that at times what is normal for us, what's good for us, because people who want to maintain normalcy either have gotten used to a bad situation or are afraid of that bad situation getting worse. It's kind of like the devil I know, or it's because their life is pretty good. And the reality is in America, for a lot of folks who want to go back to normal, is because their life is pretty good. And they may even feel bad about what happens to other people. They may feel bad about the disparities and the oppression and the marginalization that happens in communities, and they feel bad about it. And they don't they're at a point of being honest about it. They see it, but they still want to go back to normal. And I get that because there are a lot of times I want to go back to. There are things I'd like to go back to. Trust and believe, I do. But God never calls us to go back. God calls us to remembering, but God does not call us to go back, to go to the past. God calls us to remember so that we can move forward, so that we can tell the story to future generations, so that God's kingdom will come and will be done on earth as it is in heaven. Those of us who say the Lord's Prayer on a regular or semi regular basis, or who just hold it in our hearts as a model of praying, would do well to remind ourselves that when Jesus was asked, how do we pray? Teach us how to pray. He didn't teach us to pray to get to heaven. He prayed for us to bring heaven to earth. If we believe that, then we can't only pray it with our lips, we have to pray it with our lives. We have to pray it with our actions. We have to pray it with our voices, speaking truth to power. We have to pray it with our votes in the ballot box during election season. We have to pray it with how we share and spend our resources. We have to pray it with the work that we do. We have to pray it with the decisions that we make when we are in positions to make decisions that impact other people, whether that's hiring, whether that's purchasing, whether that's the decision to mind our own business or to call the cops because someone else's behavior that doesn't actually impact me disturbs me for reasons which I do not examine because I have the power to just call the police on someone. I have the power to to exercise that privilege without consequence. And it'll be easier. I won't have to be uncomfortable because I refuse to be even slightly uncomfortable, even if the person is doing absolutely nothing to cause me discomfort. Even if the person is no threat to me, is causing me no harm. The potential of my own discomfort is enough to wield that power. We've got to uncover these things and we have to delve deeper and we have to denounce them. and we have to choose each day to live a better way and to create a better way. And that better way is not a vision that we have to make up. We don't have to, what does that look like? It is God's kingdom on earth. I'm not saying kingdom, I'm saying KINDON. Kingdom, where we all consider ourselves connected to one another, where we consider each and every one of us of value and importance, where we all can embrace the beautiful, designed diversity of God's creation. It starts by listening, hearing God call our voice, and saying in response, "Speak, Lord. Your servant is listening." Thank you for once again joining me for another weekly wisdom. I pray that this has been a blessing for you. If you have thoughts to share about this passage of scripture or anything that I have shared, I would love to hear your responses in the comments. Until the next time we are together, I pray God's blessings upon you and encourage us all to love God, love our neighbors, and love ourselves. God bless and keep you. Subscribe to the channel and like this video to continue to be in community. And I pray again, God bless you and keep you. God's face may shine God's light upon you and give you peace.